welcome back to another edition of the I Prefer the 80s and 90s Sports Podcast, a podcast where I, Richard Harris, talk about why I prefer the sports of the 80s and 90s to today. Today's topic is sports team camaraderie, chemistry. The other day, one of my favorite football players, favorite athletes of all time, Deion Sanders, was talking about how teams don't need to have that type of camaraderie, togetherness. And it shocked me to hear that from him, because I've never heard any of his teammates ever describe him as selfish. I've never heard any of his teammates describe him as a guy who doesn't want to be around the guys. I always feel and felt, and still do feel and felt, believed that one of the biggest reasons, if not the biggest reason why former athletes get into coaching is they miss the locker room. They miss being around the guys, the ladies, and lady sports. They could talk about the love of the game. They could talk about they want to prove that they are smart and they know the X's and O's of the game. But the reality is every player who used to play the game can't coach, number one. Number two, when they get back into coaching, one of the significant reasons why they get back into it is that they miss being around their teammates, the locker room, the life. In the 80s and 90s, teams did a lot of things to bond. The Chicago Bears in the 80s, in 85, when they were a clear dominant football team and the clear team that people felt was going to win the Super Bowl, they put out a Super Bowl video, which was kind of like a team bonding thing where they all essentially had a verse on a record. And a lot of teams did a lot of things like that to sort of show bonding, to show that they are one. For some reason, that is not the norm for today. Because today, athletes, they're down for their boys while they're on their team, but athletes want to be traded immediately if it's not going their way, if it's not working with that particular team. Athletes want out. And not just athletes that are fringe athletes, but great ones. Kevin Durant has changed teams how many times in his career? Some people say that their ring chasing is the reason why. Some people say they're just chasing that big contract. But the reason why the big contract argument don't work is that the longer you stay with the team, the bigger the contract you've earned. Because the leagues want Dirk Nowitzki. They want Kobe Bryant. They want guys and ladies to stay with that particular team forever. Dirk Nowitzki played with Dallas for 20 years. That's what leagues want. And so, in my view, that's why I prefer the 80s and 90s over today, because in the 80s and 90s, I'm certain there were players who believed that there was a me in team. But we didn't hear too much about them. And the ones that we did hear about, in terms of being sort of quote unquote me guys, never had anyone say anything bad about them as teammates. You could talk about Reggie Jackson all you want to. But unfortunately, and I hate to say this phrase, but unfortunately, after Thurman Munson passed away, I don't recall hearing too many Yankee players criticize Reggie, because Reggie delivered. And he and Billy Martin went back and forth with their drama. And Billy Martin didn't like Reggie. But God must have, because both Billy Martin and Thurman Munson died. I don't know. But Reggie went from the Yankees to the Angels, got the Angels in the playoffs. So none of his teammates complained about Reggie because Reggie was a performer. Just like none of Dion's teammates criticized Dion because Dion was a performer. But the simple fact is, you need a culture in sports to win. And all those who say you don't, I think they're crazy. I don't know if culture wins. This basketball season, all we kept hearing about was the Miami Heat culture. Well, Miami Heat culture don't mean spit to me, because number one, they didn't win. Number two, if the culture was so extraordinary and so, important, then why, so far this offseason, several players have been traded or have left the team? And secondly, they're about to upset the culture by bringing upon Damian Lillard and get rid of players for him. And so if you're saying the culture is the coach, is the general manager, that's not, they don't play. We hear so often, there's the Cowboy way, there's the Yankee way. The Yankee way, legit, because the Yankees have won 27 world championships, and the Yankees have a standard of playing and a standard of uniformity in terms of facial hair, the way they dress. They all hang out together. And so those type of things build camaraderie, build culture. I remember the Mets. The Mets in the 80s had a culture because they hung out together. They liked being around together. What changed in baseball over the last 30 years is the Latino players like to hang with each other because they speak the same language. They ain't got nothing against the white and black players. They just don't speak good English, so they just hang out with their crew. They hang out with Dominican, Puerto Rican, and then once they all discover they speak kind of the same language, they all hang together. And I don't know if you've been paying attention, but those teams keep winning World Series. Those teams keep having insane success. Look at the Atlanta Braves. In the 90s, the Braves team consisted of a different mix of players. They won, 13 division titles in a row, 13 out of 14 from the 90s into the 2000s. And now they're back on a similar run again. But now their team is mostly Latino. They all hang together. There's nothing wrong with that. But the problem that the Mets have, they were talking about this 2 weeks ago on TV, how the Mets they don't hang out together. They don't seem to have a culture. Buck Showalter is just basically, in a lot of ways, figurehead and just kind of giving up on the season. The Yankees, people say that in recent years, the reason why the Yankees haven't won is that they don't have the right mixture of guys, including earlier this year, getting rid of Aaron Hicks. Aaron Hicks was a veteran guy. He was great friends with all the players on the team, but he wasn't hitting. They brought in Josh Donaldson. They brought in Harrison Bader. They brought in players who might look good in the Yankee uniform, but they weren't cohesive as a unit, as the Jeter teams was. The Jeter teams were tight. It was Jeter, Gerald Williams, Andy Pettitte, Mariano Rivera, Jorge Posada. They were all buddies. And the team kind of rallied around them all being friendly. They all liked being around one another. And then they had the good mixture of the veterans. They had Strawberry and they had Dwight Gooden and Joe Girardi. And they had a cohesive team. But Dion's point is, you come to college for 4 years. Well, you come to college, if you're playing football and you're really good, you come in there for 3 years. But you come to college and essentially, these are your guys, but with the transfer portal these days, they're not your guys. With the way the rules are today, they're not your guys. And so I can understand him saying what he's saying, because he's right. That, in college sports today, in professional sports today, ain't nobody trying to be loyal to a team. Ain't nobody trying to be loyal to a fan base, to the name on the front of the jersey. Everybody's all about themselves. Somebody said it yesterday, and I can't remember the word they used. Oh, yes, their own brand. Everyone's concerned about their own brand. And that, to me, is pathetic. And so, if sports continues on this path, the people in the jersey industry, you're going to lose money. Because kids are transferring to schools, NBA players, basketball, football players, baseball players are all leaving teams. Loyalty to the front of the jersey is gone.